So I'm just going to change tack for a minute and stop chairing and presenting, just in case you wonder what might be happening. Because we now come to the last session of the day, bringing safety to life through the Lloyd's Register Group. And it gives me great pleasure to host this session. And what I've noticed as I've sat through the day is how many of the themes that we've been talking about all day start to come to life in some of the work that the group is doing. What I thought might be helpful just to start with is to give an overview of how the foundation and the group work together. So effectively in Lloyd's Register, we have a commercial arm and we have a charitable arm. And effectively, this has been described as a new business model for the 21st century. So we work together on a number of areas, but I'll just highlight three. A lot of the work that the group does absolutely supports the charitable objectives in that as a professional services business, we are looking after our clients' assets, we are looking after their people and our people who work on those assets, and safety is always paramount. The second aspect where we work together is that as we are working with clients globally and understanding their clients' technological needs as well as their business needs, we start to get insights into those needs and how then we can partner with the foundation to help them shape and design not only the research projects they work on, but also looking at what skills and education are needed for the future. And the third one is around the acceleration of that research. So how can we take that and accelerate its impact into society through the services that we offer business every day? And it's that third aspect that we'll talk more about today. But just before I do that, a short commercial break, I'll just show you a video that brings to life some of the work we're doing. A quick sort of creds slide, as it were, just to give you a sense of our scale and where we work. We work in about 80 countries around the globe. We employ about 7,000 people. And as a profitable organisation, the money we make pays a dividend to the Lloyd's Register Foundation as our main shareholder to fund a lot of the research. So you can see we work globally, but what sectors do we work in? Well, we started, as you're aware, as a marine classification society, so marine and offshore platforms are very much our core business, but also then we moved into energy, and from there we've moved into quality assurance, business assurance services as well, and also then moving on to develop software. So as we face some of the challenges of the fourth industrial revolution, as we've been talking about a lot today, we continue to extend that portfolio because that word of kind of connected supply chain starts to happen. So we're particularly looking at extending that into areas such as food, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later. We're also looking at areas like cyber and data and digital, not only as maybe standalone areas of our expertise, but also how those can be applied to our clients in those more traditional sectors that we have served. So I joined the company less than 2 years ago, and we knew we were on the start of the fourth industrial revolution, and then we kind of looked back to where we started, and we discovered that we were formed at the very outset of the first industrial revolution. And sometimes you kind of get goosebumps when you realize just some of the resilience that the organization has shown to go through the second and third revolution that gives you confidence to know how we can continue to move forward into the fourth and think about what some of those global challenges are that are facing our clients and how we can still be as relevant for them today as we have been for the last 250 plus years. And so I'd now like to invite 4 of my colleagues to come and present to you on 4 topics. I'm just going to refer to my notes so I don't get this wrong. Louis Benito is going to join us to talk about keeping marine and offshore assets safe and secure. Then Vincent Doumeizel will talk to us about assuring safety through the food supply chain. He'll then be followed by Maurizio Pilu, who will talk to us about accelerating safety through digital technology. And then he'll be followed by Simon Reeve, who'll talk about enhancing safety through the public understanding of risk. And all these 4 topics are topics that, again, you can draw that line back to work that happened in the foundation that is now being accelerated through the group. Slightly differently to how we've run some of the sessions so far today, the guys are going to kind of run seamlessly through, and then we'll kind of run a panel Q&A at the end. So if you could hold your questions to the end, I would really appreciate that. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Louis.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are still keeping well awake for the last session, at least for the next 15 minutes or so. I don't know if Saiful is in the audience. Are you? Where are you? Well, you know, I'm sorry, but you cannot be the only man in the world talking to an audience, a 3D human audience with a 3D glasses on. I just want to know how you feel by doing that. It's amazing. But you look very cool indeed. It was very interesting. There's no 3D pictures on this presentation, so I just move on. It is about autonomy. It's about autonomy in this particular presentation. It's the first topic. We actually are working in keeping safe and secure ship autonomy, and everything on autonomy actually starts with digital. Digital is sort of, if you allow me to say, eating the world. CB Insights, a company where this comes from, tell us that 10 seconds you spend looking at this slide means $23,630 profit made by these companies in this slide, and then every 10 seconds they make another $23,000 profit, and nearly half of it goes to Apple. So this is a driver of everything that maybe comes right next, and I think it's a main driver, an enabler of autonomy on shipping. First of all, the digital is actually impacting industry overall. In industries are getting digitalized. If you believe what you read on the press, DeepMind, the company, very not so old company, looking at artificial intelligence, being able to give Google a 40% reduction in cost in just keeping the data cool all over the world. 40% reduction in cooling data. I don't know how much money is that, but it's a huge amount of money. And then anything industrial, actually, it is affected by digitalization, and digital is becoming the brains of industries, the brain of machinery. So it's coming to our world as well. And before I go into ships, let me take you into cars. This is driving a lot of development in bringing autonomy technology for autonomous systems into industry. One of the reasons, perhaps, if you look at the right-hand corner first, perhaps you spot that although this is the annual sales made by selling cars on the blue, or maybe mobile phones on this brown dot here, mobile phones sold at a rate of 1.8 billion units in a year globally, and that makes about less than $400 billion of revenues in sales. But cars, well, there are not that many sold in a year globally, perhaps 200,000, but that is 1.2 trillion revenue economy, 1.2 trillion sales every year. So I think digitalization is big time coming into cars and into the idea of making cars autonomous, and this is actually bringing some momentum into other industries, and surely I think into shipping. The other thing I just wanted to focus on this slide is not all about money and actually making more and more money. Actually, it's about safety of people. So if we believe these other statistics here on the right from USA, this one is from US market. If 10% of the US cars becomes self-driven cars, maybe, according to this, there will be 1,100 lives saved. 1,100 people will actually don't lose their life. If you move to making 20% of these cars self-driving, from 10 to 20, you may save 21,700 lives. Is clearly an exponential trend. Apart from that, there will be less crashes, there will be more savings for the economy, less fuel spent. So the potential benefits of autonomy on industries are huge. And I think this is why we are also looking at how to make autonomy coming into ships. And in our role in Lloyd's Register, we look at how to make it safe and secure. So we hopefully also score life saving and also probably efficiencies for companies, for economies. The concept I will show you now here is very simple, and you will have to believe it because I cannot prove it to you in 30 seconds. But basically, systems, ships have systems, are run by systems, and systems are subject to the world. Okay, the world impose many things onto systems, environmental constraints, people operating the systems, perhaps some particular maintenance strategies, and you name it. Systems get stressed by all these constraints, and one day they stop operating properly. And actually what digital technologies do is that they are able to get built into systems and become part of a system, and then start taking over the system and running the system, managing the external factors that are affecting this, managing the world. And this is something that you will have to believe. But I think if I talk to you in 5 years' time, I will give you a few examples with KPIs, and I'll prove it to you. Now we believe that artificial intelligence, algorithms, and cyber enablement embedded into systems will improve the system performance, the system safety, and it will be good for the system, good for the ships. So we built autonomy on ships, kind of system by system. It could be also all systems, and it could be the whole ship. But as you can see here, if you're in the marine business, this is very easy to understand because it's the very first taxonomy of systems of a ship, very basic. Maybe for non-marine people, this might be a bit overwhelming, but it's not. However, making each one of them to work in an autonomous way, that is a big task. So the industry picks and chooses which systems I can touch, I can embed artificial intelligence and cyber enablement on it, because maybe they bring the most benefit. And one of the most famous ones that people are looking at making autonomous is navigation system. Navigation system, because there are some numbers in the industry that lead us to believe that there is merit in changing the numbers. The right-hand side shows that 50% of a four-year statistic, 50% of the claims in value from related to loss of ships are related to grounding, 50% related to grounding, with additional 7% for collisions. 57% maybe could be related to some kind of navigational issue. So this is a very powerful number to try to lower down. And when we do that through autonomous navigation, we also realize that we can manage fuel better. So maybe we can save fuel. We remove the human interaction from navigating the ship, and we can reduce human-related risk, and it brings more benefits. So it's a very research subject, and there are already many projects finished and also undergoing on making navigation systems autonomous. So in Lloyd's Register, we have to look at this because two reasons. We just want to make sure that we can, in a way, accelerate the implementation of new technologies and innovation into the industry when there is a benefit for everybody, for society and for companies. And then we want to make sure that when this is done in a way that the ships are as safe or safer than before. And in this particular subject, that we manage the new kid in town here, which is security, cybersecurity. So we want to make sure that ships are safe and secure. And we want to do this first, because in our company, I think we just want to then lead the industry when something's brand new, and we just want to do it ourselves. Then we like others to agree and hopefully follow. So in this particular graph, we have populated within the cyber enablement cycle that now comes into a system. We identify now 9 areas of risk that we need to look at to call the system safe and secure. Many of them are new. They are not about things we have taken care about before. Cybersecurity is brand new. We never looked at cybersecurity, now we do. Others are not too new, but the way we're looking at them is newer. Systems integration, hardware, software, network communications, data assurance, data integrity, and so forth. By doing this, we can start sort of regulating the safety and security of autonomous systems and autonomous ships. This is an example of how we do it in a practical way, and this has been a little bit of learning from the automotive industry on how they look at the autonomy levels based on the degree of access of a human into looking at the system or being able to act on systems. And we have applied this to maybe 4 or 5 projects up to now for the last 2 years, and it makes sense. It makes sense. It allows people to understand how to bring technology into ships, how to make it safe and secure, and what are the complications of actually moving up the scale and getting into higher levels, and what are the implications also with regards to investment and risk. So is a good framework that hopefully the industry will like and adopt. And this is my final slide. And sometimes we think this subject is very separate, is very independent from autonomy and from systems. But actually, this is the heart of the cyber enablement. This is when we actually start running systems through artificial intelligence and algorithms. You can say that diagnostics is when you can measure the health of your ship or your component or your systems. You can diagnose. You have like a health meter. The game here is actually to predict the future health, how healthy you are going to be in the future. For systems, for ships, for autonomous systems and cyber-enabled systems, this will be possible through prognostics. And with these tools, we, I think LR, will actually look at a new way of delivering our services, which will be linked to the assurance of prognostics. Because the one thing in the middle of the cyber-enabled system will be the artificial intelligence that will make it shine. Artificial intelligence needs to be the right one. We will assure through prognostics that artificial intelligence actually will always be will always do good for the system. And this is my presentation. And unfortunately, I have to run, so I cannot sit in here because I have to catch a plane very last minute. So I think I just hand over to my colleague Vincent, who will reply to all the questions about autonomous ships.
Thank you. Hello. So the wide variety of European accent on stage. You had the European and flamenco accent. No, it's the European and arrogant accent. Saying that I do count the British accent as a European accent still. You're part of the family. So, just be serious. I'm very glad to be here today. I joined this organization 4 years ago because of this dual objective that was explained previously by Elaine, social and economy and business. Same faces, two faces, but the same reality in the end. So I joined this organization because I do believe that the ultimate objective of the market economy can only be more social justice. And I've never been disappointed so far. So I'm very glad to be here, and it's even more relevant when it comes to food, this value, because food is much more than a commodity. Food tells about your journey into life, it tells about your tradition, it tells about the world you want to live in. It tells about a lot of other things. And food, by the way, some of you may not know about it, but food, 160 countries voted at the United Nations a year ago to make of food a human right. Food is not a commodity, it's a human right. It is defined that everyone on this planet should have access to sufficient food in a quantitative and qualitative way, in a culturally acceptable way. Are we getting near from this? Yes, better and better, but it's not done yet. There's a long way to go, and there's a lot of hurdles to overcome. So the group is working on food for many years, and is a worldwide leader in food audit and food verification. But as mentioned, the food supply chain has a lot of obstacles to overcome. We'll go through some of the mega trends for this food system. So population growth, which is by far the most important one. We've got 300,000 people on Earth every day to feed, in addition to the previous day. 300,000 every day. That's a lot, and we've got no arable land left. We've got a growing part of our crops which is converted into biofuel. We've got yields that are declining for years and years. And we've got 1 billion people almost that are going to bed hunger every night. So that's a problem. That's a problem because the developing world is willing to eat the same as the Western world. So ultimately, the calorie demand is growing 10 times more than the population growth. So just to summarize this, if all the world would eat the same amount of meat that we do in Europe, we would need 5 planets covered with grazing lands, ocean included. So we're not going to make it. So all in all, various studies show that in the next 50 years or so, we will have to produce as much food as we ever produced as human beings over the last 10,000 years. That's a challenge, but we'll find a way. Food fraud and lack of traceability, which is a direct consequence of the previous issue. Because there's such a strong demand and such a lack of offer, that's a strong incentive to food fraud. We know that there are every year on the market 10 times more olive oil from Italy than Italy can actually produce. We know that 30% of the fish is incorrectly labeled and is not what you are buying. And just to illustrate that creativity in the food fraud, I always like to remember the story of a big retailer in China. I was working with them at this point of time, and they realized that in order to boost the protein level of the soy sauce, the supplier of this soy sauce was fermenting the soy sauce with human hair, which is just illustrating the creativity of this supply chain. So, and that's a very, very global system. That's the other problem. I mean, there's no traceability. It's very global. It's very fragmented. A lot of small stakeholders, small farmers, no barrier to entry. Anybody can produce food, which is not the case when it comes to oil and gas and stuff like this. So, very fragmented market, very low level of visibility, because any big food brand, they will have a pretty good understanding of their tier 1 suppliers. But when it comes to tier 2, it's more complicated. When it comes to tier 3, they don't see anything. And it can go up to 18 or 20 different layers. So the entire food supply chain is not visible. It's absolutely obscure. So that's a big problem as well. And it's very global and it's very international, and so forth and so on. The most important problem and the biggest responsibility for all of us here, maybe this fourth one here, the environmental impact and the social issues. We are the first generation to know about them. We are the first generation to know that our food production system is responsible, is the biggest contributor for greenhouse gas first, and for climate change. Or very soon it will become the biggest contributors for greenhouse gas. It will overcome energy, because energy is stabilizing. Food contribution keeps growing and growing. We are the first generation to know that our agriculture, which is based on monoculture and intensive use of chemical entrants, is responsible for this depletion of natural resources, land erosion, deforestation, massive pollution of the land and the ocean, water scarcity. We're the first one to know that. We're the first one to know as well that this food system is responsible for this explosion of non-communicable disease, obesity, diabetes, autism, cancer. We're the first one to know that this food system is responsible for this explosion of modern slavery. Yeah, modern slavery. There are 25 million people in a state of modern slavery today. 25 million. That is twice more than over the 300 years of human traffic between Africa and America. Today, we're talking about child labor, forced labor, human trafficking, and so forth. So you would tell me, what can we do about it? What is the point? Well, I will then ask you, raise your hand if you had a coffee today. Raise your hand, come on. Okay, raise your hand if you had a tea today. Okay, cool. And raise your hand if you put some sugar in it. So I think, anyway, all of you raise your hand. Tea, coffee, sugar are the 3 commodities that are the most involved with modern slavery. Enjoy the power. Enjoy the power. We deliver audit on responsible sourcing to make sure that some organizations are doing what it takes to make free from modern slavery products. And it goes the same for all the other issues that I've mentioned. Just be curious. Look at what's behind the brand. Look at what this label means, because you've got the power to change it. You are the driver of the change. In the food system, clearly you are the driver. Each time you eat and you drink, you vote for the world you want. Another issue is the low income and low margin, because food needs to be affordable. You cannot, no government, no one would accept that the food prices are going up. And for the last 50 years, food price, I mean, the dedicated portion of the revenue, in average, in France and in Western Europe, has moved from 25% to 8% in 40 years. So we are not ready to pay the price. It creates a problem of investment in the food supply chain, and it creates a problem of balance in the revenue. And we out of the 800 million people that are starving to death today, 700 million of them are farmers. So those who can and who should produce the food are the ones who are starving. That's a problem. Another big issue is the social media exposure. It's an issue and an opportunity. An issue because there's a lot of information going on in the social media, and it's a big risk for the food brands and for any food or for the oil industry in general. As an example, let me remind you, back in 2011, E. coli outbreak in North Germany. And then someone finds a Spanish cucumber in the bin of one of the infected family. Then it goes viral in the internet. Spanish cucumber responsible for this E. coli outbreak. Over the next 3 months, the impact on the Spanish fruit and vegetable supply chain will be $200 million per week. Russia will ban the import of any European fruit and vegetable. After a week, just after a week after this viral announcement on Spanish cucumber, the German authority came back and said that the problem comes from sports food imported from Egypt. But that doesn't matter. It's too late. Viral, and the impact is huge, and a lot of companies in Spain goes bankrupt because of a 1 week rumor on internet. So the company, it's a big, big risk for the company. A company like Nestlé, they have 600 people dedicated to monitor, control, and influence the discussion on the social media. 600 people. It's an opportunity for us, and it's a responsibility for us, because we will need to be able to define what is true or fake in this big, big discussion that's going on. But it's a huge opportunity for all of us, because we have a direct access to them. We have a direct access to the food industry, and our voice is heard even better. So it makes us responsible once again. So what are we doing for this? We, as a group, we have a vision. We have a vision that we have this heritage from the ocean. I mean, the 300 years of experience working with the ocean. And we have the vision that the solutions in terms of feeding the world can come from the ocean. I mean, we moved from prehistory to modern human being when we start to stop gathering and collecting, and we start to intensify the agriculture. We never did that for the ocean. Today, 70% of the planet is covered by the ocean. They contribute only to 5% of our food. Huge growth avenues. They call that the blue revolution. The group acquired a company called Acura, who is the leader in seafood certification, because we want to make sure that we are part of this and that we will leverage on our presence in marine to make the seafood world a bit safer. The foundation, once again, dual objective, 2 actions heading the same direction. The foundation funded a very innovative project with the Wageningen University in Netherlands, which is one of the most famous food universities in the world, in order to develop seaweeds. Why seaweed, you will tell me? Yeah, because seaweed is absolutely a magic element. Seaweed, only 2% of the ocean dedicated to seaweed production could feed 12 billion people in protein with no need of any vegetal or animal protein. That's fantastic. That's absolutely huge. Seaweed absorbs 30% of the greenhouse gas emission in the world. The more you will grow seaweed, the more greenhouse gas you will absorb, the more you will mitigate the climate change. So you may not be into eating only seaweeds, and maybe you will enjoy a T-bone steak sometime, but still, even if you want a T-bone steak, when we use seaweed as a source of feed, seaweed will cut by 99% the methane emission from your livestock. 99%. This is equivalent to stopping each car on the planet overnight, because the contribution from the livestock equal the contribution from the car. in terms of greenhouse gas. So that's a massive benefit as well. There's other huge, I mean, this bubble of water is fantastic. It's an edible bubble of water made of seaweed. There's a startup in London working with them as well. They are very innovative to replace the plastic glasses. The first bottle of water made out of seaweed has been designed recently by an Icelander. Seaweed can contribute to medicine, can be a source of energy. It can bring some oxygenation of the ecosystem in the ocean. And last but not least, I like this one. Seaweed is the only element that grows in salt water. It doesn't need anything, just sun and salt water. It grows in salt water, and we've got a lot of salt water. And guess what? When you squeeze a seaweed, what you get is fresh water. Yeah. So you can actually use seaweed as a source of potable water. So, and by the way, the two biggest standards for certification, MSC and ASC, called us after this to contribute to the design of the scheme for sustainable collection and aquaculture of seaweed. We have been called in many conferences to talk about our job. So I think it was good, and it was a very interesting project. Because now the group has to secure the vote from the consumer. It's to secure your vote. That's our remit. We are here to secure and make sure that what you expect from the food, from the food you choose every day, is a reality. And this new generation of people, these millennials that are born around 2000 and so, they are really after food in a different way. They want, I mean, food is part of their lives. This is what they are. They are ready to pay a premium to get the food they want. They want food that is healthy, but not only, they want sustainable food. They want a free from modern slavery, free from GMO, free, whatever. They want animal welfare. They want food is what they are. And it should be the same for all of us here, actually. So we are into this. We are into securing that vote, making sure that this is reality. Because ultimately, and I will close with that slide, which is the most important one. Oh, no, sorry. Forget that one. I will not close with that one. The foundation, so we'll develop the new food safety system. So it's a very important one. We agreed recently, I mean, the foundation agreed a foresight review on food safety, which will pave the way to the new food safety. And by food safety, we take the Food and Agriculture Organization definition, which is level 1, fighting against pathogens, against foodborne disease. Level 2, midterm impact on human health. We mentioned that. Level 3, planet ecosystem. What is the impact of the food production on the planet ecosystem? That's what we are after. That's what we want. So we will gather experts from our clients, executive buy from our clients, people from the academics, people from the institution, in order to design a foresight review and pave the way to new funding, to new investment. And this food safety of tomorrow will be enabled by the convergence of two very, very powerful trends. One is innovation, is life science, cloning, epigenetic, microbiome, vertical forming proteins. The other one is the innovation in data science. So you see some of them. We talk a lot about the blockchain, and I'm talking a lot about the blockchain at the moment. We had some previous talk before. Blockchain is an interesting topic, and it does have the capacity to create a global ecosystem to give the traceability to the food system. Because blockchain is decentralized, it's open, it's public. The data is not owned by anyone. So that has a very strong potential. If I want to be French and a bit provocative, I would say that the system is not mature yet. And to me, when it comes to food, and there's a lot of discussion, a lot of actions in the food topic, and none of them is really convincing at the moment to me. And if I have to be a bit provocative, I would say that blockchain is a bit like teenage sex, in food. Everybody talks about it. Everybody pretends they do it. Actually, very few are doing it. And the very few that are actually doing it, they are doing it pretty badly. So, but still, same as teenage sex, no one can deny that blockchain is the future of our world. So that's part of the future, and yes, we need to invest into that. We need to check that, to check what will happen with the blockchain, because that is part of the solution, yes, added with some other innovation. Another very interesting topic is the new genome sequencing and microbiome. We have 10 times more bacteria in our guts than we have human cells in our body. So we are much more a bacteria being than a human being. And we are in the early phase of understanding what this bacteria footprint is. And so we have some partnership with some other Silicon Valley-based company on this. And that's something which is very powerful, because you can tell a lot about what is life and how bacteria enable life. You can tell a lot about DNA, you can tell a lot, and you can actually trace the entire journey. I mean, not even talking about the production innovation that it will enable, but this new genome sequencing will enable to tell the entire story of a product. I mean, take your fish. You know what is this fish. You're sure about what it is because you got the DNA footprint. And then you can tell, because the environmental microbiome of the fish is from this part of the world, yes, it comes from this part of the world. And around the fillet, you will see that there's some environmental microbiome, fingerprint, so it's been filleted there, and the packaging has some microbiome, and so forth. So you can tell the full story of the product. That's going to be a huge innovation in terms of traceability. Altogether, this innovation, and just to name two of them, but we can talk about 3D printing, chrononucleation, cloning. There's a lot of things going on. So we've got all that is needed to enable this new food system that will meet the objective to make a food a human right available to everyone. Because ultimately, I mean, we should be very optimistic and we should be very positive. Just look at this graph. This graph comes from the Food and Agriculture Organization as well. It shows a number of people that are starving to death, the percentage of people. So if we look back to 1820, 94%, well, that's a long way back, okay? But let's get closer from where we are. 1980, I think everyone in this room were born, with the possible exception of Elaine. Everybody here in this room was born in that year. In that year, 44% of the population were starving to death, 40 years ago. In 40 years, the population has grown from 5 billion people to 7.5 billion people. And look at where we are, 9.6% today. Only 9.6% today. So those who are negative about the future are nothing but wrong. The world is getting better. And we, as an industry, should be proud of what we've done. We, as an industry, and the society as well, we should be proud about it. But do you think these 800 million people that are starving would take this as an answer? Do you think these 2.5 billion people suffering from obesity would take this as an answer? Do you think these 500 million people suffering from diabetes would take this as an answer? And so forth, and so forth. Environment. The cost of this was way too high. So we need another revolution in the food business. We need another revolution. And we have the tools to make it. I mean, we can make it. It's available. It's there. So the foundation and many others, they will invest. They will invest into research, into innovation, into education to accelerate this change. We, as a group, will do what it takes as well. We will harness this incredibly rich food expertise from our auditor all around the world. We will leverage these 300 years of experience in verification. We leverage this incredibly disruptive new technology to create this transparent and traceable food system and to monitor this food system. But the most important part lies with you all, with all of us. You and I, we are connected together by the same food system, and we are the driver of the change. So all together, it can only be all together. Those who can vote for the world they want to live in each time they eat and drink something. Those who cannot yet vote because they are deprived of their right to food. We could be remembered as the first generation on this planet that managed to create a food system capable to feed the entire population with safe and sustainable food. And we will. Thank you. Now it's Maurizio, another new accent coming on stage. You may need that, Maurizio.
Sorry?
You may need that. Just
yeah, thank you. Well, good afternoon. I have a difficult presentation now because Vincent just shattered my myth about Italian olive oil. So, but I'll try to hold myself together. My name is Maurizio Pilu, and I'll be talking about how Lloyd's Register, apologies for my voice, how we are accelerating safety through the adoption of digital technology. So I think this morning we started with some numbers in the keynote speech, and I want to start with some numbers again. These are figures from the European Maritime Safety Agency showing the figures for the past 5 years, actually 2011, 2016, of casualties in the maritime sector. You will have a similar one in construction, another one in oil and gas, and so on. And we can see that the numbers are big, 600 deaths, 16,000 casualties, etc. These are very, very big numbers. And as a digital technologist, I ask myself, well, could digital and data technologies help? We heard this morning from HSE that they can be used to do many things at the government level, but thinking about all the technologies happening now, could we do even more? And these are some technologies that we think are disruptive in terms of safety. Drones, for instance. I mean, we still have people, also in our company, climbing 5 stories high scaffolds to just take a photo and risking their lives. And we will see an example of that later. So drones could really help. Wearable technologies could really help in detecting, for instance, fatigue, or detecting whether people are getting into dangerous areas in a yard. Blockchain, Vincent is a big champion of blockchain in food, but blockchain, despite all the hype, is actually a disruptive technology in terms of data transparency across supply chains, and data transparency is one of the issues why safety isn't what it should be. The Internet of Things, we heard Louise's brilliant presentation on autonomy, but the IoT is essentially sensing equipment and components and detecting whether they're blowing up or whether they're becoming unreliable, which is correlated to safety issues. Autonomy. Well, there is a lot of discussion today, these days, about autonomy being unsafe. We heard about a couple of casualties in the past few months in autonomous cars. But actually, given that humans are responsible for 80% of accidents, you might think whether autonomy might actually help. So autonomy may be an answer to some of the safety problems, but how, to be seen. And last but not least, and Mark referred to that as quite a few times, is data science and artificial intelligence. The ability, unprecedented ability now, to detect patterns from large amount of data and detecting and predicting risk and preventing accidents. But there are many barriers to adoption of these technologies in safety, and safety is a very tough market to get into. What you see here is the result of a recent piece of work that Lloyd's Register Foundation did with the Lloyd's List. I think there's somebody from the Lloyd's List here, Richard. Yes, hi, Richard. This was done a couple of months ago, and the question was quite a complex question to about 500 respondents to this survey. And the question was, what's preventing you from piloting, adopting disruptive digital technology for safety? And you will see that at the top, I'll see whether I can get the laser to work, maybe not, that's not too risky. So at the top we have ROI. So essentially we have a large, about 50% of the respondents say that they don't know the ROI of their investment in disruptive technology, even basic technology, digital tech for safety. And the cost of piloting, I mean, if you combine the two together, maybe even with the third one, other priorities, you end up with a formidable barrier to actually try out new things to improve safety. And this was quite a revelation for me. And you will see that later in the presentation, I will refer to this again when I introduce some other things. But again, worth thinking about why industry is finding it so difficult to adopt these technologies. Now, Lloyd's Register, we heard it many times today, and thanks, Elaine, for the great introduction. But we believe that Lloyd's Register is ideally positioned to drive adoption of these technologies throughout industry. This was safety tech 200 years ago. Probably was good enough at the time, just a visual inspection, a bit of a tap here and there. But today, Lloyd's Register is a completely different company, is a diversified professional services firm. And as Elaine said, we are trying to innovate in the application of technologies, digital technologies in particular, to risk and safety in multiple ways. One of them is working with our foundation, supporting them, helping them shape investments. The other one is actually we innovate with clients day in and day out. We work with them, we co-create solutions. And we know that barriers to adoption are very high, so co-creation is very important. And I'll give you a couple of examples, 5 examples to be precise, in the next few slides. The first two are funding collaborations between the foundation and organizations. We heard about Block this morning, and Diana is over there, fantastic presentation, Diana. But basically, this is potentially a quite breakthrough initiative to look at blockchain applications to safety and risk in maritime. And I really encourage everybody to check the website and watch out the news when the first demonstrator will be announced soon, hopefully. The second one is a project that is a collaboration with Maersk and Shell. And it's data science. It's a data science project. It's about building predictive models of accidents and trying to detect accidents further down the line from very little events now or in the past few weeks. So you look at small events and then you try to predict big things happening down the line. This is a great collaboration with not just Maersk and Shell, but there are many, many ship owners joining and sharing data so that those predictions can become much more accurate. It's an industry-level initiative. So these are two funding partnerships by the foundation. But looking at what we do with our clients at group level, we innovate with clients with this technology, with disruptive technologies, in many ways. And I have 3 examples here that hopefully illustrate how disruptive technologies can be used practically. So this example here might not look very much. So it's a safety report from an actual client. It has been anonymized a little, but so what you see there is labels, and the labels say a few things. So you will see that the labels are around, an incident, some remedy, some causes. And these have been detected from natural text, from reports of inspectors or health and safety professionals. Now, it's very easy to do it on one report, clearly. Anybody will be able to spot those. But try to do that with 100,000 reports. And trying to do that with different languages, or try to create correlations between the different reports, trying to spot trends, try to find root causes, or try to predict accidents in advance. Now, you see that without artificial intelligence technology, it would be virtually impossible for humans to do that. Not only time-consuming, but prone to errors. So that's an example, real example of innovation that we're doing with clients. The second example is around human analytics. We know that humans are responsible for many accidents, but humans are also in danger in many situations themselves. And so what could we do if we could monitor dangerous situations? Now, this is a very sensitive topic, clearly, with all this happening around privacy and so on, but let's just take a step back from that and let's look at the potential of saving lives here. There are many sensing technologies that we are looking at, and in fact, some of them are in trial phase with clients. Body condition, so you will be able to detect whether people are tired, very tired, or falling asleep. People's behavior, you could detect with computer vision analytics whether people are entering dangerous zones in a yard, or they're not wearing a safety helmet. Many things could be detected in a quite non-invasive way, and probably very, very, in a very responsible and ethical way, to raise alarms when people are doing dangerous things. And finally, even pushing it one step further, detecting even voice and detecting distress from voice, or whether people are drunk or something. So you can imagine the potential here to detect dangerous situations. The final example is about drones. I referred earlier about climbing a scaffold. This is an actual example I wanted to show you. So what you see on the top right is a tank, and you see a scaffold there. I hope you can see it from far away. But what you see on the right is a drone. So normally a human will be climbing that scaffold to actually take just a photo or measure the thickness of the tank, an essential part of an inspection of a tank. However, there is an amazing amount of risk that a human is taking to take those photos. And what you see there is a drone flying inside the tank and taking those photos. Now, the barrier to adoption of this one is actually the quality of the images and the drone platform, whether it flies inside a tank, which is a piece of metal. So you're thinking about tethering, you're thinking about vibrations, many, many things. But the point is this technology could be used for safety and will be used for safety. But I talked about some examples we do with clients. I talked about some enabling technologies. But if we really take a step back again, why don't we have a cluster like that? So this is an example of the fintech ecosystem. It's one of those I just found one on Google. There are hundreds out there. And in fact, a very big priority for the UK government is actually to foster the fintech ecosystem in London and other places in the UK. But if we look at the ecosystem, it's amazing what it has, right? Each company's got a little slot, and they know what they're doing for their clients. You see their payment system, you will see their fraud and consumer banking. So everybody's got a little slot. They know what they are doing, right? And it's big, right? In the UK alone, I think there was a report from Ernst & Young earlier this year. I think there are 650 million of investment last year and 61,000 jobs of companies, mostly small, really trying to crack problems in the financial sector. And if we look at the definition there, I was trying to find a definition of fintech, and I bumped into an academic paper that analyzes hundreds and hundreds of reports talking about fintech, and then they've done some data science, and they've come up with the perfect definition of what fintech is about, and it's at the bottom there. So fintech is a new financial industry that applies technology to improve financial activities. Isn't that beautiful? Well, if you replace fintech with safety tech, and if you replace improve financial activities with improving safety and reducing risk, now you see the potential, the missed opportunity of not having a cluster like that, of thousands of companies trying to tackle safety problems. Now the flip side of having an ecosystem like that is what you see on the right. On the right is hype. Hype is created by a lot of people piling in, but that maybe it's a good thing if we talk about safety. But perhaps the biggest missed opportunity is around not tapping into the entrepreneurial talent out there and the investment. Now, this photo is from Plug and Play, and there is somebody from Plug and Play here. But what does it say? These are young entrepreneurs. Many of them could be my children, actually, but and they will be far richer than I am by 30 probably. But these guys have spotted a market opportunity. They're going after it. They're trying to innovate. They're trying to be creative. They're trying to raise investment. They're trying to solve a problem. And see, celebrating a demo day. We don't have that for safety. We don't have that at all. And that's why the Lloyd's Register Foundation has decided to set up the Safety Accelerator. How many of you here know what an accelerator is, or the many variations of them? If you can raise your hand. Not many, maybe 20%, a quick calculation. Actually, it's not rocket science. An accelerator is nothing more than essentially a program that, in this particular case, tries to identify tough safety challenges in our industries, difficult ones, not those that you can buy off the shelf, and put them together with innovative digital startup ecosystems. So an ecosystem of very creative technology companies trying to tackle safety issues. And the advantage of doing that is that we could be piloting cutting-edge solutions, demonstrating value. We saw at the beginning, and that's going full circle here. At the beginning, return on investment is a major barrier to adopt digital technologies for safety. So demonstrating value and how these technologies can help is a key component of what we're trying to do with the accelerator. Stimulating investment, when the private investor pile in, is because the opportunity is big, the market opportunity has been identified, things happen. And finally, maybe trying to create this safety tech cluster, this safety tech ecosystem. And that's what the accelerator is about. Please join the workshop tomorrow at 12. There's Steve in the back, and Serena will be running a workshop to explain to you a bit more what the accelerator is trying to achieve. And but last but not least, technology can only be as good as humans. We had fantastic discussions the other day, yesterday in fact, with some ship owners about collision detection. That's an example where the technologies are there already, but people are just ignoring the alarms. So this human aspect is exactly why we think Lloyd's Register is ideally positioned to drive adoption of this technology, because we really understand the technology and the human aspect and the clients. So thank you very much. And now over to Simon. Simon has got a proper British accent for a change, so it's a great way to conclude.
Thanks, Maurizio. Okay, enhancing safety, understanding risk, understanding the public's attitude and perception to risk. First of all, two risks. One is I'm the last person standing between you and your drinks or evening entertainment, so for my safety, I need to take a bit of care. Secondly, I like to walk around a bit, so I have to be careful because there's no hard barriers here, and I'll come back to that topic. Thirdly, there's a risk of you starting to think, oh, there's an awful lot of information today. So can I ask everyone to just stand up and just go quick shake for 5 seconds? Keep yourself awake. I don't want to see any sort of eyes closing. Right, thank you, that'll do. So, I would like to try and tie together some of the things that we've talked about today. Richard started off this morning making reference to a number of the foresight reviews that the Foundation has engaged in. And this was one of them, which was published last summer, the Foresight Review on the Public Understanding of Risk. And this followed a major investment by the Foundation in Singapore 18 months ago to set up an institute by the same title. And this report reflected on the fact that people's opinions on risks and their understanding of whether they're local, national, international is very subjective. It's strongly influenced by their own personal experiences, the societal norms where they live, the cultures that they've been born and brought up in. And this report concluded that some of the implications of the perception of risk really need to be understood, and we've actually heard some of these during today. They're very much magnified by the impact of social interaction. They're dependent on boundaries and assumptions in technical analysis. They're influenced by how results are presented. And actually, there's a lack of any standard benchmark or calibration. And the consequence of that is that quite often we either overestimate the degree of risk in something that's relatively minor, or we underestimate the degree of risk in something that really is quite significant. So this is really just the starting of a journey of how the Foundation's work can work to influence public society's understanding of risk. And then what's really interesting when we as the group are talking to our clients is they see a direct relevance for this in the work that we do with them. Now, the public are used to seeing a nice picture, and until the major tsunami in Asia 10 years or so ago, that was the only perception you would get from that picture. Now, so many of us, as a result of seeing a picture of waves in a tropical beach, we have a very different perception of risk based on the experience of that unfortunate event. So, what are the risks in the workplace? And the first example I'd like to share with you actually comes from a marine ship owner client who came and listened to a briefing about the public understanding of risk in Singapore. And he came to speak to us afterwards and said, we're really wrestling with a problem in that whatever we do in terms of safety infrastructure, safety systems as a top-down approach in our industry, we are not changing the number of incidents and accidents that are happening. How can we work with what the Institute's doing, with what Lloyd's Register is doing to understand this? So we begin to work with this company first to create a sort of questionnaire that the company can both understand its own perception of risk in its day-to-day operations, but it's also pitched at the employees level, down at the dockside, operating on the ships and understanding their perception of risk in the tasks they're undertaking on a day-to-day level. And when you look at that sort of breadth of different understandings of risk, you start to have a different perspective than if you start with your sort of top-down sort of safety management structure. And so the next thing that they said, well, okay, that we're starting to get an understanding, can we build that into some sort of mobile app so that our employees going about their daily lives can understand if their own personal perceptions are influencing the decisions they're making and they're putting them into a more hazardous situation rather than a less one. Now, this is still ongoing work, and as a result of talking about this particular opportunity, we've got at least 2 other clients who are also interested in this or on this journey, and I'd really like to come back at the next event and give you an update on how that particular example of perception of risk in the marine sector is producing results. Now, when we talk about our perception of risk, and Maurizio referred to barriers, another client came to us from Norway, a client of major infrastructure construction and operations business, and said, well, we've been working with you for using a technique called barrier analysis. And the human perception of risk is just one of the barriers that we're considering. You've got the human barrier. That's something that very much depends on the human behavior and response to an issue or risk. You've then got the organizational barrier, which is the instructions, the procedures. You must wear a safety harness. You must follow the protective equipment guidelines. You must work in these zones, etc. And then you get what we call a hard technical barrier. As I say, when you've got something like a safety railing, it doesn't rely on the individual's perception and understanding of risk to prevent there actually being a fall. Now, what's interesting from barrier analysis is when you start to combine these things. So a safe risk, a situation can be when you've got several technical barriers that are operating independently and they don't rely on any particular human interaction. So, for example, our abseiling worker there, if he's got one rope that's properly tied and secured at the top, if he's got a separate rope that's there as a safety rope, then you could say, well, he's got 2 independent means of protection of technical barriers. Now, they're only independent if they're actually tied to 2 separate anchors. If they're tied to the same anchor, then you lose that independence and there's a risk of fail. And then you can build up that. You can understand how quickly you build up the nature of the role of the harness, the instructions of the organization, the training, etc. So you combine all these things together. But the problem is the organizational barrier is that these studies are done in a meeting room. They're not done when you're sat in a harness on the end of a rope. And so, similarly to the marine example, this client from Norway said to us, well, can we start to develop some system whereby the individual can understand the nature of the risk they are incurring if they take a decision that actually ends up removing a barrier. It could remove a technical barrier, or it could remove a personal one that's going to have a much bigger impact on them. And you can then start to link that to some of the sensors that Maurizio was talking about, and you can then start to link to sort of monitoring your own personal behavior. And actually coming back to something that Richard Judge said this morning, is about the employee owning the action. And this is something that's really important to us. 1 or 2 people have touched on this today as well. We have to work out how new technology can help us to help the employee at any level of whatever they're doing own their own safety and the consequences of their actions. this example moves into the area of sort of operating of equipment. And again, it's taking something that in the past has been a very sort of static methodology of risk, saying we have risk zones that are fixed when you are craning equipment from a ship onto an oil rig, for example. You have risk zones that move, and you have risk zones that can perhaps be temporary. And so far, we've relied on the individual operator of that crane to make those decisions based on their own personal experience. And we've done a sort of a mapping and a static sort of assessment basis. But now with the advantage of digital technology, we can start to understand that actually hundreds of thousands of pounds and sometimes millions of pounds worth of damage are caused to equipment and property and sometimes life through dropped objects at sea. And not just because they hit something on the rig, but they've actually dropped over the edge of the rig and they hit the subsea infrastructure at the bottom. And this is a regular occurrence. You haven't just got the cost of the damage, you've got the cost of replacement and the time wasted, etc. So this is a major issue. So we've been working with this particular Scandinavian client who's been looking at how we can map all of the history of the incidents that they've got, not just on a particular rig, but across a whole oil field, and create a digital analysis of where the greatest risks are for those operations. Now, okay, this is an area that is still heavily sort of manually driven. But as we start to move into the world of autonomy, we can then sort of use this to program into our autonomous devices that don't rely on the human understanding and move us into the future of an autonomous offshore oil field whereby you haven't got any people in the future in those hazardous zones and hazardous areas of work and risks. And this is another area that Lloyd's Register Group is working with. And so Mark referred to the EPSRC grant for robotics hubs. And one of those hubs is on offshore robotics for the certification of assets, headed by David Lane and a team at Heriot-Watts University and a panel of other universities, some of whom are represented today. And they're really looking at how we can apply these technologies to the future of an offshore industry that takes humans out of that hazardous environment. Switching sectors briefly to power and switching geographies to southern Australia for Mark and other people's benefits. So again, you'll have heard, and some of you be aware of some of the frequent extreme storms that we get in southern Australia. And this has caused a big problem for grid stability of the electrical network. And in particular, the infrastructure, which relies on historic sort of fossil fuel plants, hasn't been able to cope so well with this and takes hours to get it back up and running. Now, with the advent of wind turbines, again, you have the issue of continuity. So how can we match the two together? And Elon Musk famously said about a year ago, in order to help address this issue, he would install the world's largest battery in 100 days. So the Tesla team, along with the Neon, who the Australian power company, came together and started looking at how they could match this battery technology, which we heard about earlier, with the grid characteristics. However, there was a missing piece of understanding, and that's the system modeling that enabled us to connect the electrical characteristics of the world's biggest lithium-ion battery at 100 megawatts with the Neon grid that is in place at the moment. And that's where they had to call on Lloyd's Register, and our specialist power grid modeling people worked very closely with the Neon and Tesla engineers to ensure that the two could be compatible, matching the characteristics and the frequencies, so that today the result is when there is a major incident due to a powerful storm or something similar, the power can be switched back on in seconds rather than the hours it used to take to reconnect the infrastructure in the past. And that, again, reflecting back on the public's understanding of risk that they are having to accept in that part of the world, means that we're matching technology to that understanding. The final example is in the area of pipelines. Now, these two specific examples from San Bruno, California and Qingdao, China were pretty dramatic. And unfortunately, those sort of level of incidents don't happen too often. Sadly, there was significant loss of life in each of them. And this is where the role of media comes in really importantly, because if you didn't know anything about pipelines and you saw a big media story saying, you know, tens of people were killed as a result of a pipeline explosion, then you start to think, well, hang on a minute, what does that mean for the risks of any pipelines near me? Now, whilst the number of fatalities as a result of pipeline incidents, fortunately, is relatively low, as an industry, the integrity of pipelines, many of which are 30, 40, 50 years old now, this is a serious issue. And one of our students referred to this in the research work on understanding crack propagation in pipelines and other applications. Closer to home, up near Aberdeen, the Forties pipeline had a major crack discovered by INEOS engineers back in December, which forced the closure of that pipeline, which cost £20 million a day in lost revenue opportunities, because 30% of the UK's oil flows through that pipeline on its way to meet our needs. And it wasn't reported quite so much, but the petrol price at the pumps actually went up for several weeks as a result of that particular incident. So for industry, understanding the risks incurred as a result of these issues with aging infrastructure is really significant. And the final example of how Lloyd's Register is then addressing this is actually tying together pockets of knowledge and expertise from around the world. So our US clients in particular are really concerned about this issue. It's a major concern of integrity issues and failing pipelines in the US. So we've been able to link two pieces of work together. One is a pipeline asset tracking system, which provides a digital representation of the asset that you have. And this is really important because these pipeline assets are sold now as almost like as commodities from one company to another, and they're not always doing the right due diligence to understand the risks that they are purchasing with these new pipelines. And secondly, when a crack is identified, is how can we not just repair it in a quick and cost-effective manner, but also monitor it remotely, given the vastness of the challenge. So this is where the smart sleeve technology, which is being developed by our Houston team, with some local pipeline companies and specialist suppliers, enables us to fit a collar, and there are different variants for different types of pipes and different materials, really quickly and efficiently, cost-effectively, but ongoing monitoring the stresses, the temperatures, the strains within that pipe. So you can check how the behavior of the pipe and the repair is actually performing over time and have a better understanding of any decisions that you need to make before you get to the critical stage that INEOS was in when the Forties pipelines shut down for a whole number of weeks. So, in conclusion, increasing an awareness and understanding of both our own and society's perception of risk is critical to enhancing safety in the public arena, but also in the industrial context. And I've tried to demonstrate how those two quite often need to join together and can benefit from working. The examples given outline how the group is picking up from the work of the foundation and starting out on this journey with our clients. Understanding the interdependencies of different perceptions of risk, of different risks, in the industrial setting will certainly be one of the next steps that we need to address together if we are to continue to have an impact on making the world a safer place. Thank you.
Thank you very much for, I looked around, I thought, let's just check, and everybody was absolutely glued. So thank you very much to three presenters here, and apologies from Lewis, he's had to rush off to see a client, so that's why he's not able to be with us. So we've got probably about 10 minutes before we're going to close the conference, and I hope during the past hour we've really been able to bring to life some of the ways that Lloyd's Register Group kind of on its own tends to support that critical mission of safety, and in other ways how we accelerate the impact of the work that the foundation does, and indeed take client needs back in to support the future research. And I hope we've brought that to life for you. So at that point, I'd really just like to open the floor to any questions from anybody to our panelists. There's a gentleman here.
Dave Marcel, Lewis has run. but I would challenge his assertion that cyber's new. The pioneer of what is now ISO 27001 was a chief security officer at Shell, one David Lacey. He's still around, and he helped set up the Royal Holloway faculty, which was the first academic centre of excellence. Challenge for the panel. In Germany, they don't have security or safety. They have one word that means both. In setting up a specific safety as opposed to security area, are you making a rod for your own back?
You want to take that for food?
I thought I'd make a start on the sort of the safety and the security angle. I think that's a really good point, and it's something that comes up. I've come across it not just in Germany, but actually in some other countries around the world, where the language used is different, linking safety and security. I think that works very much in our favour for cyber. Maurizio can talk in more detail about cyber itself. But I think coming back to perception of risk, we do sometimes have to be careful that we don't blinker ourselves to understanding of risk as a result of the language that we're using. I spent quite some time in southern Germany and northern Switzerland, and understand that sort of culture there and the safety culture there is actually quite different for their kids growing up to the way my kids grow up, because they expose them to risk much earlier. And one of the dangers, I think, in this country in particular is we almost sort of try to overprotect. I talked about the physical barriers, rather than giving people exposure to risk and teaching them to make smart decisions to mitigate that risk. And that's one element of it, but there's certainly an issue there. But do you want to come back on that, or I was going to see if Maurizio wanted to talk on the cyber element?
A tiny picture that I think of when I get on a boat, if the Plimsoll line's there, subsequent to the 1824 Unsafe Shipping Act, then I know if it's overloaded, I can make a decision. But if the data in the back ends is doing naughty things, or any of those other 18 verticals or in-depth layers that I look at, I don't have a cyber Plimsoll line.
Well, Well, in terms of security, Lloyd's Register has been focusing a lot recently around operational technology in terms of security. So essentially the risks that are arising from digitization of infrastructure, as well as our traditional services. And we have Paul Butcher here, who is very, very well informed about the latest developments. But the news is that Lloyd's Register has made a big move in the past months, acquiring a cybersecurity company called Netitude to really address those problems. So we are making moves in the market because there is a lot of demand out there.
Any other? Sorry. There's a gentleman at the back, just there.
Thank you. Well, I was really struck by the statistic on the miserable profit margins of safety that you used. I think the 48% people who perceive that as a barrier to uptake of safe technology. I just wonder whether you'd comment on what you can do to challenge that. And in particular, do you think that consumers should be willing to pay a premium for safety?
Well, the survey, the 48% return on investment, the figure that I showed, yeah. So that's a B2B, that's a business-to-business market. So we didn't ask consumers. It's a completely different dynamic there. But there is a cultural thing. This is my personal perspective, but there is, in traditional companies, there is a culture of, the procurement culture, where you have to buy a big system from a big vendor, and it's very expensive. And so the ROI consideration is very, very important, right? And in digital, though, things work in a slightly different way, and this is where there are two cultures really coming together here, and that's why the Lloyd's Register Foundation setting up the accelerator to get those two cultures to mix. So in digital, you tend to start very small. And it's a very, very common thing that many digital companies, including B2B, do. Digital allows you to start small. It's not like building a ship where you can only model so far. In digital, you can do quite a lot, improve a lot of value by doing a pilot. And so one of the objectives of the accelerator, but also what we do in group, in innovation, is really to work with clients to understand what starting small looks like. And that's actually, for me, it's quite natural. I'm a digital guy. I always think about stages. I think about how can I start with a small 3-month pilot. I mean, I grew up like that, but you go to the agency professionals, you go to an IT departments, in a traditional company like oil and gas or maritime, not quite ingrained as a thinking. So you have a big barrier that shouldn't be there anymore. So until we really start thinking differently around how to adopt technologies and overcome those initial barriers, I think it's going to be quite tough. But we're getting there.
I think it comes back to one of the themes of the foundation, investing in public understanding of safety, which is absolutely critical. Now, one of the challenges we see is that a lot of the industries we work on, marine and offshore oil and gas being examples, they're not so much in the public consciousness unless there's a major sort of ship incident. So they don't have that same understanding of the risks in those areas. But when we can translate it into something like the food sector, as Vincent has done very effectively for us, then you start to have that understanding of safety in a completely different sense than perhaps the safety they were taught as parents, so don't run near that steep drop or whatever else, or when they were children. So I do think that education and society is something that's really important, and that we all, from the academic community and the industrial community, need to work together on.
Yeah, I think just to enter this, from a food point of view, clearly you say an appetite for premium prices and for premium quality product and for safety in its wide definition, once again, not talking about, because it's given for granted in our country that a product is safe. But when you take the full definition, which is including the mid-term consequences on your health and the long-term consequences on the ecosystem, then we have the illustration with the organic food, which is growing very fast. I mean, it's not obvious in UK because that's the only country in Europe that is not growing as fast as the other in terms of organic because of the very specific retail system here, but that's another story. But you see that everywhere else, I mean, organic is growing very fast, fair trade is growing fast, all type of, and the food demand, I mean, is growing very fast. We have a market which is growing far faster than what we can offer in terms of audit, in terms of verification, because the demand is there. I mean, and especially by this new generation, once again, I think food is part of their identity. What they have is really what they are. The food they have is really what they are, and that's the way to live for them. And I think we have more educated clients that are fully aware, consumers that are fully aware about the consequences of their choices.
I think we've just got time for one last question, if there is one. I've got two now. 2, 3. Gosh. Okay, we're due to be out of here in 3 minutes, okay? So let's go very fast. Tell me what your question is over here, and then we'll see how the team are going to answer it.
So it's quick, it's about maritime autonomy. Lewis mentioned work on frameworks, other companies are doing that, other regulators are doing that. IMO is thinking about it, will take them at least 5 years to do anything. How do we get coherence in developing these frameworks?
Okay, and then the question here was? And then the third question was, just lost the third. Yeah, sorry.
The use of insects as food, what do you make of it, and will it be future? Secondly, fighting social media negatives with the use of social media and new laws. And finally, are you a vegetarian?
Okay, so you've got You've got kind of 3 minutes to answer those questions. Who would like to take the marine one?
I'll take the first one from John there. So absolutely, John, we cannot do this in isolation. And Lewis is a real advocate for taking this message about autonomy levels internationally through clients, through the IMO and through other organizations to get a common framework. Because it's only when we have a common framework, then we can make progress.
So, answering the question of seaweed, yes, that is a risk, but I think there's more and more understanding on land and in the ocean about the ecosystem, about the balance, the permaculture, what we call in France the permaculture. I think that's the future, and then there's a global understanding of that. There's a very consistent, you can see in China, for instance, seaweed growing with different type of animals that are reproducing each other into that. And so that's the global balance and the global ecosystem to set up. And when I mentioned this 2%, remember that seaweed is a three-dimension culture. So you don't need to grow it that much that way. You can grow it that way as well. So that's what is interesting as well. And I think we are very new in aquaculture in general. That's a new topic. I mean, it's only started really 20, 30 years ago in a massive way. So I think we've got a lot to learn, and seaweed is part of this ecosystem, is part of this. So I think we have to learn from our experience here. Insect, yes, insect is part of the solution as well. We need to find, it's a very good solution. That was another topic that we considered with the foundation when I introduced initially some projects to fund. So I think there's a lot of projects going on. There's a major industrial hurdle at the moment in order to produce a massive volume of insect feed at the moment. But that's also a solution for more than half of the population on the planet, insect. And I'm not fully a vegetarian, but tending to be more and more. The more you are you are visiting slaughterhouses, the more vegetarian you go, I can tell you.
Thank you very much. I can sense this conversation could go on for some time, and maybe it will as we leave the room. But I'd just really like to draw the first day of the Foundation Conference to a close. It's been, as I said, a kind of privilege and a pleasure to chair this afternoon's session on supplying safety. And we have another very exciting day to look forward to tomorrow. In the morning, focused on Foresight Now, and in the afternoon, working together for a safer world. And I've just been asked by Ruth to make one plug. So you will recall that earlier today we had the Lloyd's Register Foundation student competition, and where all the recipients of grants who are students were asked to kind of do a 3-minute pitch, if you like, on the work that they're doing. Well, tomorrow the tables will be turned. So the 5 major grant recipients, as companies, as businesses, will equally be asked to do a 3-minute pitch tomorrow afternoon at 14:40 to talk about what they're doing with the grant. So I'd particularly like to talk to the students, but this is open to everybody. If you could submit any questions you've got in advance, just put them on a Post-it note and leave them with the reception. Then we will make sure those questions get asked of those business leaders. Their CVs and bios are in the brochure, so you can have a look at who they are. No question is too cheeky. Nothing's off limits, particularly if you're a student and you want to ask a big boss a question. Now is your moment to do that tomorrow. So I would encourage you to do that. And if not, we start tomorrow morning at 8:45 with registration, with the first session starting at 9:25. Thank you very much to all the speakers this afternoon and to all of you for remaining. Thank you very much.